Hi. Hello. It is officially 2025, which means it's time for us to look back on 2024. Hi, my name is Lindy Jung. I am a science fiction and fantasy author pursuing traditional publishing, and this is a space where I talk about writing and my writing journey and just like all sorts of other things, occasionally books as well. Happy New Year and welcome back to the channel, or welcome if it's your first time here. So I've been dying to film this wrap-up video. Not for any particular reason, I just find these to be a really useful exercise for reflection and for growth as a creative. For me, writing is like this eternally ongoing process of creative growth. So reflecting on what I've both learned and accomplished, and even what I've failed at, has been just like incredibly useful when it comes to looking into the new year, looking into all that writing has in store for me in 2025. So that's what we're gonna do today. Just kind of go through month by month and look at all of the things that I've learned and done. I've kind of sectioned this off into like a month by month breakdown of just like the cold hard accomplishments, and then kind of a reflection on 2024's writing, and then goals for 2025 in terms of writing and reading. So that's basically what we're gonna do today. I'll get a little bit more into it in a second, but I just want to say like thank you to 2024. It's been a tough year in so many ways, but in terms of writing, it hasn't been a good year for me. Everything else, awful. Writing has been really good this year. I've learned so much. I've been able to level up my craft on so many levels. And actually one of my main priorities for this year was developing my character writing, making sure that the characters I write feel real and complete and have meaningful arcs that tie in well into the story. That was one of the major focuses for Project Moths, my adult dark academia fantasy that I queried with and signed an agent with this past year. We'll get into that. And I mention this because one of the resources that I found to be particularly helpful and just a wealth of knowledge in general has been Sabaa Tahir's Skillshare class, how to write a believable character, writing authentic fiction. Nope, it's the other way around, but that's okay. It is writing authentic fiction, how to build a believable character. If you haven't heard of her already, Sabaa Tahir is the author of the classic and excellent An Ember in the Ashes Quartet, which is a young adult fantasy series. I read this as a teenager-ish, kind of like older teen. Loved it. Her characters are so memorable, so I went into this class being like, Sabaa Tahir is going to teach me something, and she did. Sabaa Tahir's class is excellent, but it isn't even the only good class for creative writing available on Skillshare, which is the largest online learning community for creatives. Whether your interest is writing, art, photography, design, or something more specific like setting up the perfect Notion page to maximize your productivity, Skillshare is sure to have a class for you. The first 500 people to use the link in the description, which is below, will get a month of Skillshare for free, so go ahead and join today, and thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Alright, let's get into it, because this has been a long year. It has. I'm not going to pretend that it's been all like glory and sunshine, but again, it has been such a good year for me creatively and in terms of my writing, but at the same time, the other things have been so bad. There is a part of me that is also dreading 2025, but let's go over the highlights before I get into this month by month breakdown. First thing, started grad school, not for writing. A lot of people in my comments think that I'm getting a creative writing degree. I'm getting my master's in education, and I love it. I love working in a school. I love working with kids. I had my last week at my student teaching placement really recently, and they gave me little gifts. I could gush about this all day, but I just wanted to show you guys this like snowflake, this beautiful paper snowflake. She cut this out herself and gave it to me, and I loved it so much. I cried when I left. I could not handle it. When I applied for this program around this time last year, probably like a couple months, I was applying for grad school programs in like winter of 2023, 2024. And I was really, really anxious that I would not be able to balance writing and YouTube and all these things with grad school, especially because I knew I would have to get a job. I do have a part-time job, but it's been shockingly okay. And I'm mentioning this because I think that people's life circumstances are really important when you factor in what they create and what they write and their productivity. Like my current circumstances have had a huge impact on my creativity. They've inspired me and also been obstacles to me in such a way, such a big way. But I have still been able to do stuff in this past year, and I'm so grateful for that, like do stuff creatively outside of just grad school. Grad school is grueling. It's very time consuming, and it is very intellectually demanding and emotionally exhausting, all the things, but I've still been able to carve away pieces of time to like work on my writing. Unfortunately, the next semester is set to be more grueling and intensive, so we'll see what happens, but yeah, it's been good. I've been able to find time for everything. So, grad school, I finished my first full draft of and revised and queried Project Mods, my adult dark academia fantasy set in Paris about a grad school for alchemists, and a murder that happens at a grad school for alchemists. And I queried that, and I was successful. I did sign with a literary agent in July. I also just did like a query letter breakdown that came out some time ago, like a week and a half-ish ago, so if you want to check that out, that's right here. I also have a vlog from earlier in the year, closer to when I actually queried and signed. That's just kind of a vlog and a breakdown of what happened with my querying process, so that is here. And yeah, that's basically my entire querying journey for this year summed up in 2 videos. I'm sitting in like the most insane way right now because the height of the camera is not working with the height of my body. So those are kind of like the 3-ish, 2.5 main things that happened this past year. Let's go into the month-by-month breakdown. So January and February were not super interesting. I was living in Thailand at the time, which feels crazy to say because that feels like it was 15 years ago. It feels like it was the same amount of time ago as like when I lived in Paris. Those are like the same event in my mind almost. I lived in Paris like I lived in Versailles. I lived in France like almost 10 years ago. I lived in Thailand. I moved out of Thailand not even a full year ago. So I don't know what's going on with that, but I was living in Thailand working as a teacher for English as a foreign language and also simultaneously drafting my book and applying to grad school. So it was just like inching along. In March, I left Thailand. I came back to California. I left California like 3 weeks later and I moved to the Midwest for grad school, and I finished draft 1 of mods in that. So my grad school program didn't start until June, so I had like 3 months here that I was very determined to make the most of, and I don't know if I did that, but I certainly did finish my book. So there's that. In April, I was like sending mods off to beta readers, preparing my querying package, vaguely working on revisions for it. I did not do a super intensive revision on this book. I would say this book went out to agents a little bit underbaked. I'm open about that now. But in April, I did finish draft 1 of a historical short story. It's like a historical fantasy short story, which was called Project Snowdrops. And I also finished a few revisions in April for this. In May, I finished revision 1 of mods, so that was like a 2-month turnaround time. And I started querying mods like right away. Oh wait, I said that I sent it out to beta readers. That's literally not true. No one read this book from beginning to end, except for me, and that was bold. That was very bold. Don't do what I did. Do as I say, not as I do. Revise your book. Have people read it and tell you what is good about it and what is bad about it. You are so spoiled. And then, you know, like listen to them, incorporate the feedback. Do better than me. That was a very bold move, and it was partially predicated on this notion that I had that like no one would respond to me for months, because the last time I queried was pre-pandemic and I kept hearing agents don't respond for months now. And I was like, okay, great. That gives me time to do another brush up. I got my first response in like, anyway, as mods was going out, I did this like writing challenge. It was a Neil Gaiman's writing routine challenge, and then some like really bad allegations came out like a month later. Yeah, I don't support Neil Gaiman at all anymore. I'm just mentioning this because in that video I was writing by hand and I finished a Cli-Fi short story by hand. In June, I started drafting a new project. As querying stuff was happening, as I was like talking to agents and all this stuff was happening, I started writing Project Crypts, which has been in the back burner of my mind for a really long time, and this is a gothic high fantasy, also adult, and I just love this project. It's still being drafted. I can't believe I started it in June, but I got really busy. I love this project so much. It actually originally, back when I first brainstormed it or came up with the concept, probably like 3 years ago, a long time ago, I think I was still an undergrad. It was like an urban fantasy. Our world with like organized crime necromancers. It's not that at all anymore. It's about like aristocratic households of necromancers and their feuds and their problems and their issues. A lot of that is because I don't really like glorifying organized crime. I know that it's like a very common trope, but I don't particularly enjoy that trope. It's just not for me. So I switched it up and it became what it is now, which is like more Renaissance Italy inspired. A very like lush, sprawling, dark, gritty secondary world. I love it. I love this project. So that's what I was doing in June. In July, I signed with an agent for mods after like being kind of insane about it because I did have multiple offers and I was like really going back and forth on pretty much everyone who offered for such a long time. But like, again, it was just such a hectic time for a lot of people and for me because I had just started like my first month of grad school and I was adjusting, and I had actually moved into the city into like a sublease with 3, 4, at one time it was like 5 additional girls in my apartment, and it was like supposed to be a 4-person apartment, so it was just like a lot happening. I don't know, I just feel like mentioning that I felt really bad about being so wishy-washy, but I was just so torn. But I did sign with an agent for mods, the amazing Laura Crockett from Try.us, the most phenomenal agent. Could not be happier. I don't have any notes for August, so I'm assuming nothing happened. It was revision season. Also, I had like my first semester of master's degree was wrapping up, so I was like balancing those two things. September, I finished what is officially the second revision of mods and turned it in, and we went on submission. And that's all I'm saying about that. October, something interesting happened with one of the short stories that I wrote. That's also all I can say about that. I also started drafting Crypts in earnest, which is perfect because October is such a spooky month and Crypts is such a spooky book. November, still drafting Crypts. December, still drafting Crypts. And then I finished draft 1 of Project Scissors and draft 2 of Project Worm, which were 2 short stories, both kind of like horror bordering / straight up horror. I finished those in a vlog that did not perform very well. It was a vlog about just like how many short stories can I finish in one day out of my batch of short stories that are unfinished whips. And I finished 2, and they were Scissors and Worm. Yeah. I finished a lot of short stories on camera. This is not in the script, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I finished 1 book. Mods was around 90,000 words, a little bit over in its final form when we sent it out. I have 1 work in progress that currently has around 20,000 words in it. I need to work on it. And then I finished 4 short stories. And in terms of like word count, because I do like numbers, my daily average output throughout the year was 1,027 words. I was not super good about tracking everything in this like word count Google Sheets word count tracker that I have for each year. I tracked 135,000 words, which feels lower actually because a lot of like the revision work I don't input, and a good chunk of my year was spent revising. The bulk of the word count for mods went in this year, 46,000. My best day for writing was Sundays. My average word count on Sundays was like 1,500, 1,600 words. 74% of my writing was novel length and 26% of my writing was short length, just in terms of like word count. 52.9% of my writing words went into mods. The next biggest chunk is Crypts with 20.8%. That's what happened this year. So let's dive into part 2 of this video, which is going to be a reflection of my writing and like what I've learned this year. I've learned so much about writing this year. I think that like working on my first full-length adult book was just such a growth moment, and it also helped solidify the kinds of things that I want to write, that I would like to strive to publish in the future. I think a lot of the times when I was writing young adult, like I'm not gonna say that my first book, Ari's Guide, which was my young adult contemporary fantasy about a magical road trip through the desert to do all this stuff, that was such a passion project. I'd been working on that for like over a decade by the time I signed an agent with it back in like 2018. I loved that book so much. It was such a product of me writing it when I was younger. I started writing that book in elementary school, middle school, and it grew with me. The characters grew with me as I became a teenager. Most of the work I put into it was as a teenager. But now I'm older. I'm 27. I'm not a teenager anymore. And the second book that I wrote, the second young adult novel, Tiger, felt like something that I wasn't fully invested in at any point. I still grew throughout the course of writing that project, but I didn't have the same fire in me that I had for Ari's. And so it felt like a stagnation point. So I'm so glad that I branched into adult. I would still like to revisit young adult. I think that my work with that age group as an educator has like influenced a lot of how I view young adult literature. So I'm not quite ready to go into that yet. I love adult fiction. I love adult fantasy and sci-fi. I'm having such a good time with it. And yeah, here's kind of a breakdown of what I've learned. So, oh god, this is like the worst. I just kind of stream of consciousness like wrote notes into my note app. Number 1. No, this is not a number list. So one thing I've noticed is that my intuition for pacing has improved a lot. I think this is courtesy of just like reading a lot and reading mindfully and kind of approaching books with pacing at the forefront of my mind, because it's something that I think is so difficult to teach and so difficult to learn. You kind of just have to absorb it because it's so intuitive, at least for me. And I also think that short fiction has helped with this a lot. In short fiction, pacing can be very demanding. You want it to be quick, but you don't want it to be too quick. You have to encompass that entire story or moment or whatever you're writing into such a finite amount of words. and there's no room to meander. So understanding the beats and where they have to fall for a story in a short story is like so much more important. So I think that working on short fiction has helped me understand pacing at that scale, which is kind of transferred into my longer form works. Something else I've been able to work on this year has been introspection. So not just introspection like I sit there and meditate and think about myself, but incorporating introspection into my writing. This has always been a weakness of mine because I just don't necessarily think like that. And I feel like it's always been difficult for me as well to find the balance between telling and showing when it comes to introspection. But mods ended up being so character focused and therefore so introspective, and that really helped me push myself to find new and unique ways to state these things, like these thoughts and feelings that Lark, the main character, is having, and also kind of balancing that showing and telling because she's a bit of an unreliable narrator. And this also plays into the other side of this, which is I have been more introspective about myself, and that has shown in my work. Moths is such a personal story, from like the Paris setting to like my thoughts on academia and prestige academic institutions and how I hate them. That's a strong word. I think they're complicated. And also Lark as a character has so many pieces of me, not necessarily in like I put myself into this book as this character because she is such a bad person, but like I feel like she's all of these human parts of me that I've found difficult to confront, and her challenges are very much reflections of the challenges that I've dealt with in my life. But she is probably one of the most like honest and human characters I've written in a long time. She's jumped off the page. I built her, but she is such a person to me. But in any case, with that introspective side, I finally feel comfortable writing things that are personal to me rather than just like I'm writing a fantasy story because I like a fantasy story. Now I'm getting to that point where I feel like I'm writing fantasy and science fiction because they are speaking about something that I feel very strongly about. They contain pieces of me, these like bits of myself. I don't know, I'm not afraid to expose myself in that way anymore, if that makes sense. And it's been like really rewarding and fulfilling. Another thing I've been working on this past year is getting weirder with my metaphoric language. So figurative language, metaphoric language, I'm someone who has, for the past couple years, not just this year, been really interested in writing literary leaning science fiction and fantasy. So that's genre fiction with a commercial hook, but it's also got a writing style and a voice that feels a little bit more like literary fiction. So a little more flowery, more introspective now, a lot of figurative language. And I think for me, I'm a very like vocal writer, so I hear the words in my head. I love figurative language. It's hard for me not to just repeat stuff I've read or heard, or it has been that way for a while. So when I was first trying to write in this fashion, a lot of the figurative language I was putting onto the page was regurgitated. It was familiar phrasing, and I'm starting to become more conscious of that, or what something I've worked on in the past year is recognizing those pieces and bits of language that are just regurgitated and trying to fashion them into something new or coming up with new turns of phrase. And that has meant getting weirder and more specific with my figurative language, and that's been a really fun exercise for me. And I think that's noticeable to me even just reading back what I've written of Crypts so far and comparing it to Mods. Not saying that Mods is like rife with figurative language that is taken from somewhere else or chopped up from other familiar places, but Crypts is just got so much more rhythm and fluidity. So that has been really fun for me, like weaving together character and voice and language and prose. Like, I don't know how to describe it fully, but it's such an interesting exercise, and I've been having such a great time with it. Another thing that I've worked on this year and that I want to really continue working on as a fantasy writer is building more complex and interesting fantasy worlds. Crypts is my first secondary world fantasy in a while. Mods has a fair amount of world building, but it takes place in a version of our real world. It takes place in Paris. So it's not quite as much of that like heavy lifting in terms of culture and language and history and things like that. It's just like slightly tweaked. What if alchemy had been real? What if everything alchemists said that they could do back in the medieval times was true, and how would society have changed? So it was more of like a thought exercise versus the world building for Crypts from the ground up. I wanted to make it vaguely reminiscent of Renaissance era Italy and like Renaissance era Europe in general, but very, very different because there's some elements to the story that I have to justify through the world building that would not have existed in Europe in this time period necessarily, like these cultural attitudes and all this stuff. So from the ground up world building, I've done that before with Project Tiger, but that was basically just like, what if Korea what if Korea? And it's like lightly fictionalized, there's some fantasy elements. It wasn't like as much of a task as Crypt's world building has been. But I found the Crypt's world building to be really fun. If time consuming, if kind of annoying sometimes, very fun. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm more interested in building up the skill of world building. I would not say I'm an expert yet, but I do think that Dune 2 was an entry point for this. Dune was so good. I don't know, I just never thought that such complicated world building could be done in such a way that was so accessible to like a broader general audience. And like, don't get me wrong, I have many critiques of Dune, but I just think that the way that they were able to pull off that world building and make it accessible and understandable with like light explanation from other people, I had to have it explained to me a couple times by my partner. It was a feat, and that was very impressive to me, and it was inspiring. Like, yeah, I kind of want to do that. The last thing that I wanted to cover is theme. Theme has been on my mind a lot lately over the past couple years, but this year in particular. Again, reading mindfully has come into play here. I'm reading mindfully while keeping an eye out for themes. I'm not fully comfortable invoking theme in a graceful way in my work. Like, I can go into a project and be like, here are the themes. Having them come across is kind of a different beast. The themes in mods, actually, when I was like talking to other people about that project who had read the project all the way through, the things that they were bringing up were things that I had considered but not fully consciously incorporated as themes into the work. I think I am capable of like incorporating theme in that more graceful and subtle way, but can I do it consciously? We're gonna find out. I will say that this is another way that short stories have helped me a lot, like writing short fiction, having to incorporate theme in that relatively short word count. But I also think it's like a little bit easier to incorporate theme into short fiction because you write short fiction so purposefully. You go, here's the story I'm going to tell, here's what I want to get across, and it's done in a short amount of words. It's usually a very condensed unit of story, and I think that makes it kind of easier to convey theme if you're able to incorporate that in an elegant way. But I still think it's a helpful exercise just to like get to know the ropes of theme and how to weave that into a story. I do also love short fiction for the opportunities it gives to explore different themes that wouldn't necessarily carry an entire novel. So that's kind of a breakdown of the main things that I learned this year in terms of writing. And so let's go into the last part of this, part 3, goals for 2025. These are very concrete goals, kind of. Well, it's a mix of concrete and more abstract because there's a lot that I want to learn about writing. Like, I just want to keep growing and improving and learning. I'm gonna say it again and again because it's true. I just can't abide the thought of being like this forever. My main goal, my primary concrete goal, is to finish and revise Project Crypts. I've floated multiple timelines for that on here. I don't think any of them are going to be true. I did tell my agent that I would have it done by spring. We'll see. I have to write my thesis, so we'll see. I will definitely like let her know if I can't make that. So far I think I can. I haven't really taken advantage of my winter break as much as I would have liked to, but we're getting there. I also want to decide on and hopefully start my next writing project, my next novel. I'm thinking a lot lately about like career stuff. When I'm dead, what books will people judge me off of? No, that's not what I mean. As a writer, part of me wants to just write whatever I want. Part of me also wants to have people who, for example, if someone reads mods, I want them to be able to pick up something else that I've written that is separate from mods, like a different world, different characters, different themes, and still be like, oh, this is something that lynndjung wrote, and I enjoy both of these. Maybe in different ways, but if I liked one, I want to be able to like the other. So that's kind of what I mean. Like, I want my backlog to be cohesive, but at the same time, I don't want it to be like, I wrote mods, here's a carbon copy. Here's the same book with the serial numbers filed off of my own book. And I think that Crypts is really different from mods, but I do think it has a lot of like tonal similarities. And obviously if you're like more of a secondary world fantasy fan and more political intrigue kind of intense fantasy fan, you'll like Crypts more, but you could get something out of mods and vice versa. They also share a strong female character, so that's a common theme of mine, I guess. I really like writing kind of nasty, complicated, strong female characters. All of them are Korean, even if they're not actually stated to be Korean or it's a fake world. They're all Korean. Trying to figure out what in my half-finished pool of like unfinished works fits into that. Bibliography? Biblioteca? Discography? Fits into my filmography. Let's say that. Trying to figure out which of those stories would slot nicely next to those has been kind of a challenge just because I write such varied and odd things. And also a lot of the old ideas that I used to be in love with do not appeal to me anymore at all. I used to be incredibly hyperfixated on this like urban fantasy concept idea of like the main character has a curse, a very specific curse that I won't get into just in case I want to write this in the future, and also does contract work for demons. So if like demons make contracts with people and then like get different things out of it, and if a person tries to break the contract, she's the person who goes and collects. So kind of like a bond bails person, bail bonds person. And I was obsessed with that idea. It was set in Los Angeles, mostly in Koreatown. It was so like regional and specific to me and my interests, and I have no interest in writing it anymore, like at all. I don't know what happened. I guess I changed and grew as a person and stopped being obsessed with the demons, which was like a huge obsession of mine for such a long time. Concerning, maybe, but yeah. I think the issue is a lot of my projects that I brainstormed and developed earlier on in my career that doesn't exist yet, like back when I had the agent that I signed with for like young adult stuff. A lot of it is either like young adult or just in general really commercial genre fiction, and I'm moving more and more, I think, in my interests into that more literary leaning space. And not a lot of my more developed ideas support that, so I'm panicking a little bit. I also really want to write another standalone, so Mods is a standalone. Crypts to me is most likely going to be a duology if I can swing it, but I want another standalone. Like, I really enjoy standalones. I don't know if it's like the short fiction brain speaking through me. I have like one option right now for that, and I'm kind of reluctant to write it because it hasn't marinated. It's an idea that's been in development only for like a year-ish, a year and a half maybe. I came up with this because I really wanted to write literary fabulism. I had it in my head like 2 years ago. I wanted to write literary fabulism, and then I ended up applying for like I can say it now because I didn't get in. I applied for like a fellowship, but it's one of those fellowships where you go somewhere and they feed you and house you for like a month. And I applied for that. I didn't get in, but I ended up writing like an entire synopsis and like 20 pages of this thing. And the characters actually really gripped me. I am thinking about developing this into something slightly more commercial but still very literary leaning, but I just think it needs more time. It needs more time to simmer. So that's what I would probably work on next, but I just don't know. I just can't commit for some reason. Another goal for 2025 is to write and publish some more short fiction. I did not publish any short fiction in 2024, which is a huge bummer, but I was very busy with like querying and working on more of my longer form stuff. I can't guarantee publication for any short fiction I've worked on, but I think that just like the volume and like the quality, just continuing to up my short fiction game and send that stuff out, send out pieces I'm proud of. That's like definitely something that I want to kind of do in the background and like in between stuff in this upcoming year. And then the last thing I want to do is, you guessed it, continue to grow as a writer. So there's a couple of areas that I've been focusing on this year, and there's like different areas I kind of want to focus on now. I think I could brush up on plot. Like, I'm very familiar with 3-act structure, Save the Cat beats, but I want to be better at just like coming up with these plots that wrap up in a really satisfying way. Like, I don't know, you know those stories where you just read them and they wrap up and you're like, wow, that was a really good conclusion. I think conclusions are a bit of a weakness of mine because personally I love a bittersweet or a sad ending, so I purposefully leave things unconcluded, but I want to write something that does wrap up. And I think also in terms of plot, being able to weave character arcs into plot more purposefully, more gracefully. Crypts is very much a book that strives to do that, and that's one of the reasons why I want to focus on that. But yeah, I'm just such a character-focused writer. I love writing characters. I love coming up with their arcs and their growth and like just writing who they are. Like, it's so exciting to me, but weaving that into the actual ABC of what happens in the story, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. Also bringing theme into that, so bringing theme into the plot and how the plot reflects the theme, especially conflict. I think it's hard to describe, but it's so easy for me to fall into. Plot is just this happens, this happens, this happens. And I want to get better at consciously being like, okay, this happens, and then because of that, this happens, and this plays into the theme because that character's choice reflects on the theme in some way, and the characters are also being pushed to grow in this way that they weren't expected to or weren't expecting before. Like, having all of those threads come together is something that I've only ever accomplished on accident, and I want to accomplish it on purpose. So that actually concludes this video. This was probably going to be a really long one. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here with me throughout this year of writing, and like, I honestly could not do this without you guys like supporting me and being here, commenting on my videos, and also feeling like I have that writing community. with you guys. Yeah, just thank you so much for everything. I hope 2024 was as good for you in terms of writing as it was for me, and I hope that 2025 is fruitful as well. Let me know what you've been working on this year, your biggest accomplishment for writing or otherwise of 2024 in the comments below. Let me know what your goals are for 2025, any New Year's resolutions, and yeah, oh, if you made it this far, feel free to drop like a little confetti dropping emoji in the comments as well. Thank you so much again for watching, and have a wonderful kickoff to 2025. I'll see you guys next time.